Unit 6. Contracts used in the real estate market. In this chapter we will look at the general characteristics of contracts that are most commonly used in real estate transactions. A real estate contract is a legal transaction between two parties, whether it concerns the purchase, sale, or any other form of transaction in the real estate market. These are bilateral agreements which need to be prepared in writing, and most often certified by a notary public. The most common are the purchase contract, the lease contract and the contract with the real estate agency. Each has different ways and terms of use. Contract of sale. A contract of sale for a real estate or a sales contract is a contract for the sale of a real estate by which the seller of the real estate commits to hand over the property that is the subject of the contract to the buyer, whereby the latter acquires the property right on this real estate, while the buyer undertakes to pay the seller the purchase price specified in the sales contract for the same property. The contract must be concluded in writing, as required by the laws governing real estate transactions, since the contract is only valid in this form. In order for the buyer to achieve the registration of a property right on the basis of a sales contract, the real estate must be described in the contract with the information that are entered in the land register. The sales contract is merely the legal basis for the acquisition of the property right, which means that with the contract alone the buyer does not yet acquire the ownership right. In addition to the valid sales contract, the acquisition method of the property right in the real estate is also required, the registration in the land register. Thus, the buyer does not acquire the property right already with the conclusion of a sales contract, but only by entering it into the land register. In most cases, the parties agree on a deposit under the sales contract. It should be pointed out that the monetary amount has a legal effect of a deposit only if the parties sign, a contract for the sale of real estate at the time of handing over the deposit. The main components of a sales contract are the information of the buyer, seller and real estate. The information on the contract parties, buyer and seller, are the following: name and surname, natural person or company, legal entity. Place, natural person or registered office, legal person. SS number, natural person or registration number, legal entity, tax number. The contract must also include the essential elements of the sales contract, namely the subject of the contract, real estate, and the price. In order to adequately protect the legal position of both contractual parties, it is important that with the contract the parties also agree on the deadline or deadlines for payment of the purchase price and the method of payment of the purchase price, the term of delivery of the property, as well as the moment when the buyer acquires the property right on the sold real estate. When a buyer pays a purchase price or a portion of the purchase price with a bank loan, it is recommended that the contract also indicates the number of the seller's transaction account onto which payment is required. The contract must specify the purchase price, that the buyer undertakes to pay for the property, as this price is the base, for the assessment of sales tax, notarial charges and fees for entry in the land register. Lease contract. With a renting contract for an apartment, the landlord undertakes to hand over the apartment to the tenant in use rent for a certain rent. In addition to regular maintenance of the apartment, for example replacement of lamps, cleaning of the apartment, payment of a plumber for unclogging of pipes under the sink, the principal obligation of the tenant is the payment of rent. The landlord, however, is obliged to give the tenant the apartment for use, while at the same time taking care of the maintenance of the dwelling which is not the consequence of the regular use of the apartment, for example changing windows, doors, installing new radiators. A lease contract is concluded in writing for a fixed or indefinite period, and in accordance with Article 91 of the Housing Act it must contain at least the following essential elements: description of the apartment, its location, area, structure, communal equipment, year of construction and the way of using the apartment. Identification code from the cadastre of buildings. Name and surname of the owner, tax number of the owner, name and surname of the tenant and persons who will use the apartment together with the tenant. Termination reasons as defined in Article 103 of the Housing Act. Type of lease by category of rental apartments. Provisions on mutual obligations of contracting parties in the use and maintenance of housing and common parts of an apartment building or multi-dwelling building. Amount of the rent and the method and terms of payment. Method of payment and the amount of costs not included in the rent, referring to the costs of supplied electricity, water, district heating of apartment and the like, individual operating costs, and the costs for the operation of the common parts of an apartment or multi-dwelling building, joint operating costs. Provisions on how to use the dwelling and how and in what time periods the owner will check the proper use of the dwelling. The duration of the lease relationship, if the apartment is rented out for a fixed period of time. Their way of handing over the dwelling. Contract with a real estate agency. The contract with a real estate agency is concluded by the seller when the agency acts as the go-between in the sale of the property. Due to the real estate boom, where property prices rose to the sky due to increased demand as the market slowly recovered, the number of concluded contracts in the real estate business and real estate market also increased. The number of real estates purchased by foreigners in Slovenia is growing from year to year. The most common foreign buyers are Italians, Croats, Austrians, Germans, English, as well as Russians, although statistical data cannot be obtained because real estate is usually bought through companies. It is widely accepted that real estate contracts are complex and incomprehensible, which is often wrong. The following steps can help you when faced with such a contract. It is necessary to understand the types of real estate contracts, and how each of them can benefit the investor. Read each contract carefully, including fine print. Nevertheless, leave the drawing up of the contract to lawyers or real estate agents.